All right, hello, boys and girls. Today we are on lesson 67. So in your math notebook, make sure you put at the top lesson 67 notes. We're going to be learning about writing tenths and hundredths as decimal numbers. So along the same lines as what we've been talking about all week long. Not too much different. But let's go ahead and get started together. Remember, here's your equivalent fractions. The following fractions are all equal to 1/2. Okay, so you should be able to name the equivalent fractions that are equal to 1/2, be able to read them out loud and continue the pattern all the way to 12/24. Okay, so you should be able to practice that on your own. Be familiar with that. Okay. Here is our power up mental math. Let me shrink that down for you. All right, one more time. There we go. All right, letter A, 10% of a decimeter. Remember yesterday we talked about what a decimeter is? So we're talking about what is 10% of a decimeter. 10% of a decimeter is a centimeter. A centimeter, okay? And 10% of a centimeter is a millimeter, okay? So letter A, 10% of a decimeter is a centimeter. Letter B, 10% of a centimeter is a millimeter. Remember, we need to be able to remember those things because it's going to help us convert measurements, okay? We need to know that they are 10% of each other. All right, letter C, remember that that sign is the square root. So it's asking you what is the square root of 64? The square root of 64. And the square root of 64 is what you're going to write for letter C. Letter D, 640 divided by 20. Go ahead and work that out. Letter E, an octagon has how many more sides than a pentagon? How many more sides? So you need to figure out how many they each have and then do the math. Letter F, how many days are in a leap year and how many are in a common year? I'm going to help you out with that one so you don't have to waste too much time. In a leap year, there are 366 days, and in a normal common year is 365. Okay, so on leap year, we have the one extra day in February. All right, our next one, G. The answer choices on a test problem are labeled A, B, and C, which means the probability of guessing correctly is 1 out of 3. What is the probability of guessing incorrectly? That's important to know because when you take a test, even if you're guessing at multiple choice, depending on how many answers there are, changes how close or what's your chances of getting it right or wrong. Okay, so if it's A, B, and C, you have a 1 out of 3 chance of getting it right, but you have a what chance of getting it wrong? That's what it's asking you. But if you had lots of choices, like if you had 5 choices, you would have 1 chance of getting it right and 4 chances of getting it wrong, or 4 chances of getting it wrong and 1 chance of getting it right. Okay, but we're looking for a fraction there because it's probability. So go ahead and put your answer there for G, and letter H, you're just going to do the math and then write your answer. All right, let's go on. All right, power up problem solving. Angie is playing a board game with her niece, Amber. For each turn, a player rolls 2 dot cubes, like dice, right? To determine how many spaces to move her game piece. Angie wants to move her game piece 10 spaces. Make a table that shows the way that Angie can roll a total of 10 with 2 dot cubes. All right. So The first thing that we need to do is we need to choose an appropriate problem-solving strategy to solve this problem. Angie is playing a board game with her niece, okay, and for each turn, the player rolls 2 dot cubes to determine how many spaces to move her game piece. Angie wants to move her game piece 10 pieces. Make a table that shows the way that Angie can roll a total of 10 with 2 dot cubes. Okay, so here's our table. It's already up there, so you can copy that into your notebook. First cube, second cube. I don't know why they're calling it a cube instead of a die. Okay, it's the same thing. I'm not sure why they're using that language. It's a little bit confusing, but let's go ahead and solve this together. So we're gonna put our first cube or our first dice. Make this a little bit bigger. Oh, sorry, this one. Let's make it 16 so it's easy to see. Okay, the first die, let's say we rolled a 4, then what would need to be on our second die to get a 10? 6, right? We're just looking for things that add together to equal 10. All right, so then if we rolled a 5, what would be on the other die to get a 10? Would have to be a 5, right? And if we rolled a 6 on our cube or on our die, then we know that the second one has to be a 4. All right. There are not any other options because if we rolled a 2, we would have to roll an 8, and there is no 8 on a die, right? It only goes up to 6. If we rolled a 1, we would have to roll a 9. Again, we couldn't do that. Okay, so we can rule out those numbers that we could not get a 10 if we were only using 2 die or 2 cubes. So there's our answer. 4, 6, 5, 5, 6, 4. Okay, moving on. This is our new concept for today. In this lesson, we will write fractions with denominators of 10 or 100 as decimal numbers. A common fraction with a denominator of 10 can be written as a decimal number with 1 decimal place. Okay? Just like we did yesterday towards the end of our lesson. So here is 0.1 is the same as 1/10 because remember that this decimal place is the tenths, right? When we talked about it with money, that's where the dime would go. Okay, so that's 1/10. So we would say 0.1. The common fraction 1/10 and the decimal 0.1 are both named 1/10 and are of equal value. The 0 to the left of the decimal point shows the whole number part of the decimal is 0. Okay, so there is no whole number, so that's why there's a 0 there. So let's look at example 1. Write 3/10 as a common fraction and then write it as a decimal. Okay, so first we need to write it as a common fraction and then we're going to write it as a fraction. The 3/10 is written as a common fraction just like you would imagine it is, okay? You're going to write 3 over 10. Okay, nothing new there. That should be easy. We've been doing that. A common fraction with a denominator of 10 can be written as a decimal number with a 1 digit after the decimal point. The numerator of the fraction becomes the digit after the decimal point. So we write the decimal number 3/10 as that 0, right? Because we have no whole number, 0.3, okay? Because it's in the tenths place. Okay, so 3/10 becomes 3/10 as a decimal. Don't forget that decimal point there. And don't forget the 0. Both are important. All right. Example 2. A portion of the square is shaded. Name the shaded portion as a fraction and as a decimal. Okay, so let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we know 10 is going to be our denominator on the bottom of our fraction, and then it tells us to name the shaded portion. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4/10 is shaded as a fraction, and now we're gonna write it as a decimal. So we're gonna write 0.4, okay, because 4 is in the tenths place. All right, good. See, not too tricky because we've been doing this all week. All right, number 3, example 3. Name the number of the shaded circles as a mixed number and as a decimal number. Okay, so here we have one whole. So there's the first part of our number. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we know 10 is the bottom of our fraction, the denominator. And we only have one part shaded, so we're going to put a 1 there. There is our mixed number. Remember, mixed number means that we have a whole number and a fraction. Now, we're going to write it as a decimal. Now, instead of writing a 0 first, we have to write 1 because remember, on the left side of the decimal point is the representation of our whole number. And this time we have a 1. So we would put 1.1 because the numerator is 1 and it's over 10, so it's in the tens place. Okay? All right. Here we are to our new concept, part 2. The common fraction with a denominator of 100 can be written as a decimal number with 2 digits after the decimal point. The digits of the numerator of the common fraction become the digits of the decimal number. Okay, so this time we're in the hundredths place. Super important. Before, when we were dealing with 10 on the bottom, we were just in the tens place. But now we've moved over to the hundredths place. So this numerator has to go in the hundredths place. It can no longer hang out in the tens place because that is not where it belongs. Because we have 100 here on the bottom in our denominator. Okay, so now it has to scooch over. Make room for a 0. Okay, so notice that in the decimal number, we placed the 1 2 places to the right of the decimal point so that the 1 is in the hundredths place. You can see how this numerator moved to the hundredths place. And this one, what did this one do? It's still in the hundredths place because it ends in the hundredths place. So we do not need to add another 0 here because that would mean it's in the thousands place, right? So we're not going to add an extra 0. Same with this one. It ends in the hundredths place, okay? And we know which place because it tells us in the denominator. So let's work on it together. Example 4. Write 12 hundredths as a common fraction and as a decimal number. Okay, 12 hundredths. That tells us something. It tells us lots of things, actually. We know that for 12 hundredths, we have to have 100 as our denominator, right? Because it tells us right here, hundredths. So let's write our fraction first, because we already know that our denominator is going to be 100. So now we know that 12 is going to go on the top as our numerator, right? Because it tells us 12. 12 hundredths. Look, you could just draw that fraction right there. Okay, that's the same, 12 hundredths. But it also asks us to write it as a decimal number, and we know how to do that. So we're going to write 0 because there's no whole number. We're going to write a decimal point, and then we're going to write the 12 because it ends in the hundredths place, right? Here's tens, then here's hundredths, and it ends in the hundredths place. Okay? So we do not need to add another 0 here because then that would push us out to the thousands, and we're not there. Okay? We're only dealing in tens and hundreds today. All right. I think you've got it. Example 5. Write 4 and 3/100ths as a decimal number. Okay, now 4 is part of a mixed number, right? It is also our whole number. So our whole number always goes to the left of our decimal point. Now it tells us 3/100ths. Well, if we put 3 right here by itself, it would be, we wouldn't know what's going on, and it would not be right. So we need to add a 0 here to hold that 10 space because we're talking about hundredths. And then we're going to add our 3 into the hundredth space. Okay, so here we have 4.03. That's our decimal number. We would still read it just like we read the fraction, 4 and 3/100ths. Okay, we would still just say 4 and 3/100ths, but we would see it as a decimal, or 4.03, but we would say 4 and 3/100ths. Okay, because it's in the hundredths place. All right. Example 6. Name the shaded portion of the square as a common fraction and as a decimal number. Okay, so we're going to assume that there are 100 because remember today they told us we're only working in 110 and we know there's more than 10. So we're going to assume that there are 100 little squares here. Okay, so 100 is our denominator. Okay, we know that. So we don't need to count it all up. We're going to put 100 on the bottom, but we do need to know how much goes on top. So if we know this is by 10, right? 1, 2, 3, that's 33. Okay, 33. So we are going to write 33/100ths. Okay, 33/100ths. That is our common fraction. 33 over 100, or 33/100ths. Now we need to write that as a decimal number. So there is no whole number, so we put 0. We put our decimal. Now we just need to add 33 over here at the end because it already gets us to the hundredths place, because remember the hundredths place is our second place. Okay, we don't need to put the 0 because it's already 2 digits. All right, good. So you should have 0.33. We would still read that the same, 33/100ths, 33/100ths. All right, here is the lesson practice. Name the shaded portion of this rectangle as a fraction and as a decimal number. Okay, so let's count our total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 and 5 is 10. So 10 is our denominator. And the shaded portion is 7. Okay, so we have 7/10. Now, if we want to write that as a decimal, we need a 0 because there is no whole number. We put our decimal point, super important, and then we just need to put what? What's the last part? 0.7. Remember, we're over in the tens now. We're not in the hundreds, so we don't need to go over to this extra spot. We stay right here in the tens. All right. Name the unshaded portion of the rectangle as a fraction and the decimal number. So same thing. We know 10 is on the bottom because we still have the same amount of squares. But now we only have 3 on top as our numerator. So there's our fraction, 3/10. And we're going to write our decimal number as 0.3. Okay, not too challenging. It's actually pretty simple when we stop and we break it down. It's when we rush through that it becomes overwhelming. However, if this is not making sense to you, then please, please, please come to study hall and say, Mrs. Garcia, you say it's simple, but I don't get it. And we will figure it out together. Because for some people, this just doesn't compute. And for other people, this is easy peasy. Okay? So it's okay if it doesn't make sense, but it's not okay not to ask for help. So ask for help if this is not making sense. Name the number of shaded circles as a mixed number and as a decimal. Remember, when they ask you for a mixed number, they're asking for a whole number with a fraction. Okay, that's what that means. A whole number combined with a fraction. So we have 1, 2. That's our whole number. Let's put our mixed number over here. So 2. And then we have how many? We have 3 tenths, right? Because we have 3 shaded out of 10. Ooh, this is kind of sloppy here. Sorry, guys. Hard to draw with this little touchpad. Okay, now we're going to write it as a decimal number. So 2 goes first, then our decimal point, then 3. Okay, and we read it the same. 2 and 3 tenths, 2 and 3 tenths. Name the number of unshaded circles as a mixed number and a decimal. Okay, so same thing. This time you do it on your own. Okay, unshaded. So what do we need to put? Okay, we have no unshaded whole number. So it's not going to be really a mixed number. It says mixed number here, but it's not really a mixed number, right? It would only be, oh, sorry about that. Let me undo that line. We would only have the unshaded part. And what would the unshaded part be? What is that telling me? Name the number of unshaded circles. Sorry, I'm looking because my book tells me something that's not right. So I'm just trying to figure out why it tells me. Oh, I was looking at the wrong one. All right. It's not in here, that's why. Okay, so we would do the same, but we would only do this part, right? Because there is no whole number. So we would say, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tenths is our fraction, and our decimal would be 0 because there are no whole unshaded circles. 0.7. Okay, 0.7. Okay. Again, it's the same thing here. So we're just going to move on because I think you guys have got it. Now, this last part, write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal number. Okay, go ahead and do that in your book. Write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal number. I will do the first one with you, and then, well, the first 2, and then you'll do the bottom 2. Okay, so here we have 0, because there's no whole number, 0.9, because it's in the tens place. It's a 9, not a 4. There we go. Okay, and then 39 hundredths, we're going to write 0, because there's no whole number, 0.39. Okay, good. Now you do these ones. Remember that these ones do have a whole number, so you need to put the whole number before the decimal point. All right. And now you're going to write each decimal number as a fraction or a mixed number. Okay, so just like we did before, but backwards. Okay, so here's our decimal, 0.1. So we know there's no whole number. And we see that this 1 is in the tenths place. So we know it's over 10. So we write 10 as our denominator and we write 1 as our numerator. Okay, and I'm going to do this last one down here with you because it has the whole number. So we're going to write 2 and 54. That's a 5. 54. And what do we put as our denominator? We put 100 because it ends in the hundredths place. Alrighty, there we go. Good. I hope that makes a lot of sense to you, but again, if it does not make sense for some reason, that's okay, but come to study hall and get the help that you need before we move on and you get more lost, okay? It's important for you to tell me that you're not understanding so that we can get it figured out before we move on to other more complicated things, okay? You guys have been great, and I will see you in class. Check Moodle to see what your homework is for today. Remember, this is lesson 67, so check in Moodle to see what it says your homework is. All right, talk to you later. Bye.